More. I think we have to begin. Welcome, everyone. This is the final session of our 4-day International Forum on Youth. I'm so glad to see all of you here. We've had a really great week. And, we were talking just before we began, and everyone was kind of exchanging ideas about some of the presentations that we've had this week. And it strikes me how great my job is, that this is what I get to do every day, is to exchange ideas with smart students and smart colleagues and live in that world of ideas. And I just love it. And so I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful to the audience. I see some faces that have been here all week. I love it. I'm grateful to all of our speakers. Thank you. You've really made this a great event. I have to confess, I was very unsure about what a Zoom event would be like, and it's exceeded my expectations. It's been rewarding, and I think that's because of all of you. So thank you. I also really quickly want to thank the whole team at ISP, Dr. Ching Levine and Tim Honadell, and of course Maritza Munzon, who's been just fantastic in putting all this together. And also I want to thank Saab Matsumoto, my colleague and friend, who's been just a joy to work with. He's not smiling, so I'm not sure he agrees, but I think it was good for me. But thank you all again. So this is our scholars panel, and we have several presenters who were with us this week. And I'm going to fire away with some questions here in just a moment, and I'm going to ask each of them to answer these questions. And then we'll certainly be happy to take questions or comments from any of you. We are streaming this live on Facebook, so if you don't want your face to be shown, take that into account. If you have comments or questions, again, we really want to hear those, so put those in the chat. I think Saab will be watching the chat, and so he'll jump in when good questions or any questions come up, and we'll handle those as they arrive. So with that, let's begin. I'm going to ask our presenters, our scholars here, our experts here, to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll begin with our questions. So if you would, we'll start with Dr. Reagan Ramali. If you would tell us a little bit of who you are.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this exciting panel at College of the Canyons. I'm Dr. Reagan Ramali, and I currently serve as the Interim VP of Administrative Services at Los Angeles Mission College.
Thanks. Haruka.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haruka Sakaguchi, and I'm a documentary photographer based in New York City. I presented my first documentary project, which addressed atomic bomb survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Great. Pamela?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pamela Williams-Pies. I teach sociology at College of the Canyons in Valencia, California. And I presented this week on challenges and strategies for students facing a global pandemic. Really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for all your good work.
Next up is James. James.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Sydney, Australia. My name is James Ivanotakis. I'm the Associate Vice President of Engagement at Western Sydney University here in Sydney. Having just returned from spending 12 months living in Wyoming at the University of Wyoming as a Fulbright Fellow. And my research areas include political partisanship. I've also done a lot of work, as I was mentioning, on the student journey and the student life cycle and what makes a positive experience for students.
Thanks, James. Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Cute. I'm a professor in the Cellular Molecular Biology department. I spoke to everyone today about ways to scare you about cancer. So basically giving you a list of possible risks and myths, because we know there's a lot of misinformation out there. I really wanted to highlight for our young individuals out there who are using social media as a way of connecting during this time of the pandemic to just be cautious and fact check the information that you see. Thank you for having me here. It's great to see everyone.
Thanks, everybody. So let's begin with our questions.
And again, sorry, Brian, we're missing two speakers.
Oh, we are?
You and Tim.
Oh, okay. I guess that's true. Tim, go.
I'm
and
Tim
Saab,
Honadell.
too, Saab.
I'm Tim Honadell, and I work at College of the Canyons in the International Services and Programs Office. And my presentation was on the migration of species. which I think most people think of as invasive species.
Thanks, Tim. And I'm Brent Riffle, and I'm in the history department here at College of the Canyons. And I spoke on Monday about a really important and overlooked moment in African-American history called the Great Migrations, which took place throughout most of the 20th century and kind of changed the landscape and the demographics of who lives in this country and what we do for a living and our politics and culture. And we might as well have Saab jump in. Saab, tell us who you are, please.
I did not speak, so I am not one of the speakers of this forum. My name is Saab Matsumoto, and I teach mathematics, and I am on this team, but I was basically facilitating some of the sessions, and I have been listening to some great presentations and messages. So thank you to all of you who did your presentations.
Great, thanks. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead with my first question here, and we'll just go in the order I think that we just, and feel free to jump in as we move along here, but I'll start with you, Dr. Reagan-Romali. What are some of the impacts of globalization on young people today?
I think youth today have more of an opportunity to get to know each other than youth ever have before. You know, back in my day, there was a telephone and you had to dial international to reach someone on the other side of the world. And there just was no opportunity for interaction with people from different countries. But youth nowadays have opportunities far beyond. So globalization for them is a tremendous opportunity. It's the sharing of resources, whether that be technology, oil and gas, transportation, food. They get to an opportunity to see these industries globalize and find commonality literally around the world. So they're introduced to people from all over the world and get a clear chance to bring understanding to themselves and to their own culture far beyond what people in my generation did. So it's an opportunity. It's also a challenge to learn beyond their horizons, to expand their way of thinking. And if youth and students nowadays really capitalize on that opportunity, I think that we will be able to solve a lot of the problems that have really plagued the world over decades that we've been unable to solve. I think the opportunity is ripe for students and our youth to capitalize on it right now.
Haruka, same question to you.
Yeah, well, kind of piggybacking off of what Dr. Romali was saying, I think globalization does present an opportunity for young people to become storytellers. You know, I feel like this current generation is a generation of storytellers because these platforms where you can share your own stories, even if you come from a marginalized community, it has become democratized as long as you have a phone, a device, and you don't need a lot of tools. I mean, I think I would say I'm a living testament to that. I didn't have a lot of resources. I obviously didn't have a lot of connections in the photojournalism industry when I started the 1945 project. But yeah, all I needed was well, a couple months of research for sure, but a DSLR camera that I got for $500 on eBay, and I was able to conceptualize the project and was able to kind of come up with a finished product so that I could start then pitching to publications, which I would imagine would have been unheard of in previous generations.
Yeah, thanks. Pamela, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think globalization, in at least in sociological orbits, it is a mixed bag and multi-layered. There are so many opportunities and those kinds of things. You might remember American economist Jeremy Rifkin's book in 1995, The End of Work, talking about the digitization, the sort of automation of society, and how that has created a new landscape where, I know for many of us back in the day, we'd go up to a storefront and knock on the door and say, I'd like to speak to the boss and meet them and shake their hand and fill out an application for a job. I'd like to sweep your floors in your shop. And those days are gone now. And we are forced to submit resumes online. And even in the private sector, that's the MO now. My brother's a headhunter and he's working from home now. And his job is to call people and say, I've got somebody to match you with that's going to go work for Lockheed Martin and do this with scientists. And it's made it even increasingly difficult. So what that does, and we address this in other forums, is it's forcing our next generations to be innovative in how they engage with the global markets. And I think we're seeing that our generations are up to the call, and they're starting to come up with some new ideas that the rest of us hadn't thought of, or maybe even had opportunity to dial into because we didn't have the technology. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and we're sort of, I think, in that uncomfortable shift in the middle right now, where we're trying to find that new space, especially with the introduction of a pandemic that has defined how we interact with each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think young people continue to impress me with their ability to confront all these dislocations, economic changes that are so rapid. And you're absolutely right. James, same question to you. What are some of the impacts of globalization on youth today?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, look, I suppose just picking up on that theme is the idea that it's like most phenomenon. It's a double-edged sword. It does open up the many advantages that have been described by been described by Reagan and Haruka, but there's also the flip side, the risks involved, and so the countless opportunities, even in the panel this week, when one of my students got to jump on and join and build this connection, and she's a student from China, and so her ability to sort of negotiate this space is amazing, and it does open up these many opportunities. But then there are others who may not have that opportunity, and globalization process actually can potentially increase the gaps, those who might not have access to certain technologies. And we can see this, we can see the sort of the internet penetration rates, say North America and Australia versus somewhere like the continent of Africa or different parts of South America. And so in a way, it is something that is both creates new opportunities, but also a new set of challenges. And I'm sure that Kelly will talk about the way that we've the way that it opens up new information and the ability. We've never had access to more information, which is amazing. But then also we're overwhelmed with the information, and in some ways our brains haven't been able to keep up with the amount of information. What's good, it sort of requires a new sets of literacy to negotiate those things. So it's like everything else, it's a double-edged sword. So much potential, but then there's also the risks that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, Kelly, thoughts on this?
Well, everyone has really hit on some very important points, and so maybe I'll just link it specifically to my field of science. And say that I think that it's led to a shift in the way science happens. For generations, science was really built around competition. It was sort of like the publish or starve. You kept your data quiet. You didn't share it with people because you didn't want that person to publish before you published, or to find that finding before you found it. And now I think with the recognition that science really needs to have this collaboration, and you look at the fact that many of the major science projects that are happening, like look at the Human Genome Project, for example, there were 200 labs around the world that collaborated and worked on that, and we're sharing ideas, they're sharing best practices. It's become so much more of an open interaction that I think is benefiting all people in order to do that. And I also think it kind of realigns our sort of America-centric, America first viewpoint, to be honest, because a lot of people would say, like, we have the best science and we don't trust data coming out of South Korea. We don't trust data, and it's just completely wrong. There's fantastic, amazing science happening around the world. And I think that people are starting to recognize that and to open those channels for communication. And I just think about my own graduate program. I was in a lab of 15 graduate students and postdoc students, and I was the only American, even though it was in the United States. And I think it was a fantastic experience to learn about. And then as a totally separate, not related to academic, look at BTS and K-pop. They culturally have swept the world. This is not what I listen to, but I have so many friends, and they have overtaken the Beatles. Right? They have oversold the number of records sold by the Beatles, which has been this iconic band for how many generations. So I think it's happening. I think it's exciting. And I'm really, I think that it's going to open great opportunities for our younger generation.
I couldn't agree. I didn't know in 15 minutes into this we'd get into K-pop, but here we are. But I think you're right. I think that's a great example of how that sweeps across the world, and no one cares about where it's from or who's bringing that music. They enjoy it on its own level. I think that's really great. Thanks for all those comments. And Sab, if there were things that you drew from the students' response to some of that to that notion, let me know and jump in here. Otherwise, I'll move on to our next question.
Well, I mean, very quickly, students didn't have nearly as much depth. And so basically they talked about things moving internationally in company, doing international business. Nothing near the depth of insight that you had. But I'd love to hear Kelly sing some karaoke K-pop though.
She's going to leave if we make her do that. Yeah, she's got another meeting. I think one thing I drew from students' comments were that they were optimistic about the global environment. It was one thing I took from their comments. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Reagan Romali here for our next question. What do you think is an urgent, or what are some urgent, pressing issues facing youth today?
The youth today have never had such an opportunity that they have to engage globally as they have today in 2020. But I think what worries me is, in my mind, there's one thing that stands in their way of capitalizing on this phenomenal opportunity that we have in our lifetime, and that's divisiveness. Divisiveness, of course, it goes on back in history as far as we know, but never have we seen people who are in power, who have power through having a lot of money, people in powerful countries, people with powerful religious doctrine, trying to manipulate and use that power to control the youth of today and their belief systems. We can look historically and find where purposeful divisiveness with an intent to control populations has led to dramatically negative outcomes. So I would encourage students to study history. At COC or anywhere across the world, study history. Look at where you see these patterns repeating themselves. So when you see it happening in your own life, whether it's on your Facebook page, in your encounters with people, when you watch a presidential election, ask questions, look for the facts. The facts are hard to find nowadays, but look for the facts, then make your decisions based on facts, and do not allow this incredible opportunity that's ahead of us in 2020 for global understanding to pass us by due to purposeful divisiveness. Return that favor with purposeful unity, purposeful harmony, purposeful peace. I think that's the message I would give to students.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of of course, I'm a history teacher, but I'm biased, but I think a lot of the problems that we have stem from historical illiteracy and a lack of awareness about that. And I think that's a huge issue. Yes. Thank you for that. I'll turn to Haruka. Same question. What do you think are some urgent, pressing issues facing youth today?
Yeah, I really love the way that James put it as a double-edged sword, because as much as obviously globalization, kind of gives us this perception of interconnectedness and togetherness, right? There's also the caveat that it operates mostly in the interest of either the richest countries or, corporations when we're talking about information. And I think an urgent issue that's facing today's youth specifically is kind of what, Dr. Romali had referred to as well, this algorithm-based misinformation and disinformation, right? Which increases polarization and isolation. And that's something that I personally felt as well during the onset of this pandemic. When I was walking out in the streets of New York and I was called a racial slur. This was back in March, when terms like the Chinese virus and Kung flu were being uttered by the administration. Definitely didn't help. But after I had this experience, I started to research other cases of pandemic-fueled racism against Asian Americans, and before I knew it, like within a day, my Facebook feed was inundated with local news coverage and posts by different advocacy groups by Asian Americans, and they were all talking about violence against Asian Americans. And the more I was taking in this news, the more I was I started growing paranoid of going outside, and I became kind of distrusting of my neighbors. And it was really within a 24-hour period, I was starting to see Google ads for like self-defense training, but also for like to buy weapons at one point. So it was this kind of exponential factor was really astounding to me, and something that I felt is very specific to youth today.
Yeah, I think the pandemic, I agree with you. And I think the pandemic, unfortunately, has brought out has heightened some of that divisiveness and rhetoric. Pamela, same question to you. What do you think are some of the urgent pressing issues facing young people today?
In Kelly's talk yesterday about the distrust of science, I was reminded of Richard Hofstadter's piece, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, which was written over 55 years ago, and I think is even more relevant for today, because part of that polarization is a distrust of critical thinking in general. And I think one of the dilemmas that we've presented our students, particularly here in the United States, which is a very entitled country and a very sense of, has a sense of exceptionalism. We've promoted capitalism and consumption on the most obscene level in the whole world. And yet we haven't provisioned students with the jobs, with affordable housing, with healthcare, with all the things that human beings need to survive. So we have this paradox where we've said, look, we want you to buy all these trinkets so that the top 10 can live very comfortably and well in Beverly Hills and in Malibu, while you work minimum wage jobs. But we really aren't preparing you and giving you the program to get to there and to enjoy those kinds of things that is part of what is constructed as the American dream. So I think that's problematic. We're talking about social issues and social policy particularly, and the leadership needs to get on board with creating some policy. However, it'll be interesting to see how that fits into global capitalism, because globalization also means that you have this polarization between the richest countries and the poorest countries. And so it may not be in the interest of the commandeers to conscript a program that will enable everybody to participate fully. So I think that's part of the issue. And we've seen all the literature on students that can graduate with a bachelor's degree and never find a job. And so the ante keeps getting raised. And so if we don't have education that's affordable for people, then how are they going to be able to enter that? Even if we want them to enter that market, even if we want them to participate as consumers, then we need to at least provide them with the opportunities to play the game.
Yeah, I love a lot of what you said, and I especially the cost of education, because I worry that the costs of education are such a barrier that it actually erodes young people's trust in education itself and value of education. I want to hear from James, but I skipped Tim on our last question. I don't know why I'm doing this to Tim, but Tim, what do you think is an urgent, pressing issue for youth today?
I think time is one of their biggest issues. So if you think of critical thinking versus common sense, and I say common sense with the most highest level of demeaning, they don't have time to research the truth and go through all the details. There's way too much misinformation out there, and there's too much profit associated with misinformation. And so access to information, which has always been the divider between the haves and the have-nots of the world, starting at a very, very young age, having parents that read to you, having access to encyclopedias. My generation remembers the stories of African Americans in impoverished areas, moms buying an encyclopedia on a time money plan, one every 6 months or something, in order to get that information in the house.
Yeah.
Now it's the internet. And so the ability to have access to the internet, I think, is the number one problem they're going to need to solve, because that needs to be accessible everywhere. And then the double-edged sword that everyone has talked about is the time to spend accessing that information to discover what the real truth is. I think that's going to be the biggest issues for the next 25 years.
Yeah. James, what your thought? Thank you, Tim. James, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Brent, and really great point, Tim. Look, when I teach globalization, one of the first things I say when I describe it as a phenomenon is the shrinking of time and space. You know, I talk about my mum migrating to Australia via war-torn Greece, and it took her 3 months on a ship. You know, you know, the process of getting a passport or buying a ticket or something like that. And now we can, you know, I can probably, you know, as long as my passport's ready, I can I could be on a plane tomorrow to the US if I decided that, you know, I wanted to hang out with you guys face to face because you're such awesome people. So that's, you know, that's one of the things. And I think time itself then all of a sudden becomes this double-edged sword, right? That itself becomes this really interesting thing, that there's so much of what we have shortens time and gives us more times, and simultaneously other things expand, you know, make time so valuable. And it's the one commodity that you can't get more of. You know, it's a really interesting one. Look, I agree with everything that's being said, but I'll throw something else in there, and I'll throw in this one as a bit of a provocation. And one of the big challenges I think facing young people, you know, there's the grand challenges of climate change and pollution and all that, but one of the grand challenges is the generation above them, and us having to get out of their way so they can solve problems. You know, the amount of times I see colleagues saying to young, vibrant students, "Oh, we've already tried that and it failed." So rather than kind of using it as Brent, as you said, as a history lesson, as a way to say, you know, let's learn from the past and build on it, and having that conversation, it's one of outright dismissal. And I think what we do is we without meaning to, is perpetuating that level of cynicism to make everything feel that it's impossible to solve. And I think there are solutions there, and there are, you know, I mean, that student panel the other day was so inspiring to hear some of the things that were said. But we just got to make sure that we partner with the next generation to learn from the mistakes of the past, but not in such a way that is one of, we know best and we tried this and it didn't work, so find something else to do. And that level of cynicism sometimes that maybe we carry as a generation is something that we experience from the generation before us, and it's something that we should make sure that we don't pass down to the next generation. And so, you know, in a bit of self-promotion, I wrote a book a few years ago called From Despair to Hope, and talked about this process of moving from that sense of despair to the process of hope, to look at a problem-solving society and how we can do that. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be mindful of, that as we go through this education process, as we go through these connections, that we don't perpetuate cynicism and actually promote a sense of partnering to find solutions. So I think, you know, my warning is one of the urgent issues is for us not to be part of the problem, I suppose.
Yeah, I think in the US, at least, I can speak to that. We have such a long and unfortunate history of generation gaps. And I personally think that this is where colleges, community colleges in particular, can be a positive force for that partnership between generations that you're talking about. Not only just modeling, but also really real actual engagement with one another and real collaboration. And because I think you're right, it's vital. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this? What are some urgent issues facing today's young people?
So one of the things I've noticed for my students particularly, just comparing like what my experience was as a student and going into graduate school and into my professional career to what they face today, is that I feel like they're expected to know more. That it's no longer like you can be a biologist who understands cell division, that's not going to be enough. You also have to have an understanding of physics. I'll use cancer biology as an example. So now that we look at the way that we treat cancer patients, it used to be enough to like have a biology understanding of how the body works and how cancer works, but that's not going to cure a patient. Now you have to bring in chemotherapy, and that's an understanding of chemistry. You have to bring in radiation, that's an understanding of physics. To understand all of those, you have to have mathematical predictions of how the disease is progressing. And so really what we're expecting from young people now is you have to become a master of none, a jack of all trades. I can't remember what the saying is, but I think that that's quite challenging, because as I went further and further in my studies, I got to be more and more comfortable that I got to focus on one thing and learn about one thing and put all of my time into that. And I don't think students can do that now. I think that that's quite a challenge because they're competing against so many people trying to get into these jobs. They have to prove that they have these skill sets that are not just discipline specific, but also technology. I think about the experiments and the technology I had to know to be within my lab and work in my lab for 10 years. Maybe I had to be proficient in the use of 10 different types of equipment. That's not going to cut it anymore. Technology in sciences is growing so fast, and they have to keep up with also like the computer technology. They have to know how to do everything at once. And I just don't know, again, it is a time constraint that's associated with that, but I also just think it's almost an unrealistic expectation. And they're burdened by this. They have this heavy weight on them of like, how much can I learn? How much can I know that needs to be part of that process? But on the flip side of that, I also think that this could lead to better collaborations, because maybe you're not an expert in physics, but you can find someone who is, and then you're building a collaboration and a working relationship in that fashion. But I have a lot of students telling me they feel like they're being pulled in too many directions at once. I guess that would be like a really simplified way of describing it. And I don't know the solution to that, because I feel like the more we learn, the more technology there's going to be, and the more collaboration is going to be necessary. But I do see that as an issue specifically for my students.
Yeah, I do too. I want to, oh, I'm sorry, Sab, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just one thing. Students said something similar. Many of them did mention social media and materialism, violence, and so on. But one thing that they mentioned repeatedly was the sense of being stressed and loneliness. Many of them said, they feel very lonely and that there's need for survival, and they're asked to grow faster than ever. And I think that's a part of what maybe Kelly was talking about, how they're expected to know everything and everything has to be up to date. And so the stress and the loneliness are the two things that several people mentioned.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to get more in depth with social media in a minute, because I think it's kind of the elephant in the room here. But I want to build on something Kelly said too, and hear all of your opinions on this. Kelly was talking about a lot of things, and one of the things she was mentioning was that students need hard skills, right? They need they need training in certain specific areas. What are some soft skills that young people are going to need to have in this century to succeed? I'll start with you, Dr. Romali. What are some soft skills that people need to have?
Definitely the ability to have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you and be able to find common ground and find that commonality. Also the ability to critically think and question whatever it is you're being told to find out if it's factual, and then be able to make factual decisions and find factual workable solutions to those types of problems that you're presented with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Haruka, the board keeps shifting on me here. Haruka, there you are. What do you think? What are some soft skills that young people need to acquire?
I think, this is probably going to sound more, I'm kind of echoing Dr. Romali's sentiments here, but empathy is obviously a huge factor that I feel is very difficult to cultivate in this age, when it's really easy to kind of tuck into your echo chamber and kind of surround yourself with the information that serves you and your own interests, right? And that can easily turn into obviously polarized beliefs, but also the isolation that Saab was talking about too. And I feel like that's the one thing that young people would find difficult to cultivate in this generation specifically.
Yeah, I think one of the folks in the chat here, Omar, added a good point to yours, Haruka, which is interpersonal communication. And I think that's really, we have room for growth there, for sure. Pamela, what do you think? What are some areas, some soft skills that young people need to acquire?
I think I definitely 100% agree with Dr. Romali and Haruka that, empathy, compassion, being able to get along with people that aren't like you, which is huge, especially for dominant groups. Too much whom is given, much is required. If you have more privilege, you are more, responsible for some things than people that are less privileged, at least on a kind of a global level, institutional level, okay, as a group. So I think there's that aspect. Tim, I think, mentioned something about common sense. And I'm not sure how to transfer this soft skill because, we have some really brilliant minds in STEM and in social sciences and in the arts and this sort of thing. But being able to think fast on your feet, and I don't want to sound like a baby boomer right now, but I look at my nieces and nephews and they come up against something that seems very simple to solve, but they've never had to do it. And they're 20, 25, 30 years old and they're going, what do I do? What do I do? Whereas back in the day, we would have pulled off a shoelace, took a tree limb and tied a little rod to it and, threw beads up in the air and burned incense and prayed and something would have happened. But I think how to learn just how to think outside the box, I guess, is what you're saying, because there's so much black and white. It's really easy to teach rote learning, memorization, but developing those skills to recognize the nuance of how to problem solve a situation, I think that's a really great skill to kind of adapt.
I completely agree. Tim, thoughts on soft skills?
Yeah, so what I've noticed is probably from a pretty small slice of students because I work predominantly with international students. And what I find from them is that a majority of them are interested in accomplishing something, a degree, predominantly because there's some sort of a golden ticket associated with that for the future. And during that process, they're not necessarily concerned about the relationships that need to be developed for the purpose of managing that golden ticket in the future. And so it seems like the international students that come to College of the Canyons have a tendency to maintain the majority of their relationships with people that they left behind. And the new relationships are not common. And so when they finish, they have only one other place to go, and that's back to those initial relationships, which may or may not be there for them. And so the whole concept within the people that I work with of developing that social capital through the duration of your college years, which is, I think, a big reason for going to college, is not part of their agenda. And so we end up with a mentality of entitlement because you've accomplished and supposed to have this golden ticket and no ability to make it work or make it happen with social capital. So that if social capital is included in the soft skills category, then I think that's something that we don't advertise in our classes now about the value of that. We might define it in a psychology class or a sociology class, but we don't necessarily make it an exercise to realize the value of it.
Yeah, I agree. I want to get to a really great question in the chat, but let's finish this thought we're on. James, what do you think here on some soft skills that young people need to acquire?
Yeah, look, I think it's been picked up on empathy. I think I think empathy is obviously a really important one. I totally agree with Tim. I think one of the problems, but is if we go back to one of the challenges we spoke about before, was time. You know, I remember when I went to uni, when did my first degree at the university here in Australia. You know, taking an extra 6 months to finish your degree was cool. Like, you know, we didn't we didn't earn that much more debt. There was partial debt, and debt in Australia is very different to debt in the US. But you know, people weren't in a hurry to get out there and get a job because they were carrying a huge amount of debt in comparison to now. And there was a sense of optimism that we had time to negotiate, you know, to take our time at university to learn the different skills. And in my degree, I could pick subjects that had nothing to do with what I was learning because the degree was designed that way. I think one of the challenges that we face now is that people are in a hurry to get out because of the pressure that they're under, you know, the successes that we spoke about in a sort of a global capitalist system. So there's a lot of challenges there that I think restrict that ability. And I think that's one of the problems that we need to solve as educators. I think the other really interesting one, I think is, and I talk about this a lot, is the idea of problem definition. I think one of the really important skills is, I remember once talking to someone and I asked them what would be the ideal graduate. And they said someone who picks up the phone and knows to ask the right question. And I thought I've ruminated around that a lot. And I was like, okay, that's not asking for an answer, that's asking for a question, right? And so again, when we think about the way that we teach, we often teach in such a way that we challenge students to solve something. What about the idea of actually helping, working with students to identify what the actual problem is? And I think that's a really interesting one. So problem definition, I think, is an important one, and why I describe that as a soft skill, because that is the essence of empathy. The empathy, when you get to know someone, when you get to know a community that's facing a challenge, it's understanding what their challenge is and defining the problem rather than just assuming you know. And I think it's that ability to sort of to have those moments of communication. And, you know, I really also think that idea about being able to talk to someone across political divide, I think is really important. But I think that's something that we all struggle with these days. You know, I mean, how many times do we get stressed about spending time at Christmas with family, because we're like, oh my God, how am I going to hang out with Uncle Kevin, right? So, you know, oh my God, I disagree with him so much. He voted for who kind of thing, and we've lost that skill. And so it's not surprising that I think that it's a skill that we need to get better, that needs to be cultivated, I think, across generations, not just a skill that the next generation it needs to confront. So something that we need to get better at as well.
Yeah, and you know, I agree, and I think that sometimes those folks that have a different perspective, I think sometimes, at least I'm guilty of building straw men out of them, right? And making assumptions about their perspective and their views. And so once I do that, I've shut down any real dialogue, and I'm guilty of it as much as anyone. I want to move on to something that came up in the chat. But Kelly, what do you think? What are some soft skills that you think young people need to develop?
So I've been writing notes furiously as everyone else speaks, because as soon as an idea comes to my head, someone says it. So I think we've hit on some really great things about empathy and compassion. Some things that I wrote down were having a growth mindset and to not be afraid to ask questions. And this is something that we really try to train into our students, that asking a question isn't showing weakness. Asking questions is the way that we continue to learn, and we should always be open to continuing to learn. And I also think just in different fields, if you try to pretend that you know how to do something because you were afraid to ask questions, and that's going to just lead to a whole bunch of trickle down issues for you. And so having the confidence to say, like, I don't know that now, but I will learn it. I don't know it yet, and this is what I need to do to get to where I need to understand it, I think is a very important skill. But as someone who teaches eugenics and the history of how genetics has been used improperly, I really think compassion and empathy for one another is like #1 on my list. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes, see what their life experiences have been, and try to form an understanding of their viewpoint from that.
Yeah. I want to take a detour here from my questions because a really great one popped up in the chat here, and I'm just going to open this up to anyone or all of you or whoever would like to respond. But the question, I'll just read the question here. Do you feel like the lack of the ability for young people to understand different perspectives and find common ground was taught to young generation? Was taught by I'm tired here. Was taught by older generations who raised today's youth?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that, Brent. I think, the baby boomers have constructed this reality for our youth, period. They've constructed the capital market and said, buy these things. Y'all need this iPhone, iPod, iPad. Y'all need to consume. Y'all need to have the best kicks. Y'all need to have hip hop music. Y'all need to do things that make you feel cool. And so they've constructed an ideology that has already defined what the youth will be. And then when youth feel like this is the default, that they're supposed to go for things, then the adults come back and say, oh, you're so self-centered, you're so narcissistic, you don't care, you're apathetic. And I beg to differ about today's youth, that they are any of those things. I think that's really a reflection of the baby boomers and their own narcissism and their inability to take a look in the mirror and see what they've presented to you, because children don't invent these things. Children don't invent the social landscape and reality. They only mimic what's been taught to them by adults. So I want to thank Miracle for her question, because I think we need to keep that at the forefront. Remember why youth have these desires, that these socially constructed desires, whether they're needs or wants, that's not the issue right now, but those desires themselves are social constructions, and they've been handed to them by the generation or generations before them.
Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Something that I think that has changed, and I'm old enough to have the generation of traditionalists raised me as the oldest Xer that there is, probably by a day. What Pamela was talking about that sort of that social construct is taught to us. What's new now is that social construct is not just coming from our small group of peers and our small group of teachers and our parents and our grandparents. That social construct for the last 10 years has been coming across through Facebook and other things. And it spins out of control in so many different directions so fast that I think the era of learning everything from your parents is over. And we're entering an era of we learn from many, many different sources, and they're not all looking after our best interests, which I would hope that most parents are, as flawed as their parenting might be, are really looking towards the best interests, or what they think are the best interests of the people they're parenting. And now Facebook doesn't care and is not interested in your best interests, and all the other social medias. I'm just not picking on just Facebook. So that social construct is now coming from many, many different directions. And a lot of where I see that now, the social construct, is that a college degree doesn't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. A college degree is not important. It gets you nothing except a job at Starbucks. Right. And there's a lot of evidence that says there's a lot of issues with a lot of degrees out there. But there's plenty of companies now that are starting their own internal degree program, because they just need you to do these certain tasks. They'll give you the certificates, they'll put you to work, and you'll make more money than, a bachelor's degree in, especially in a humanities degree. So that social construct stuff is going to change things a lot.
I want to hear from others, but Miracle, would you add to this, please?
Hi. Yes. I just kind of wanted to ask another question to piggyback off the first one. I do agree that now we have a lot more influences at us because of social media and all that. But the generation I'm in is the weird generation that didn't have social media at first and then got it towards the middle of our lives. So we were half shaped by our teachers and our parents, and then the other half by social media. And I feel that created a very interesting generation that we have now. And my question would just be the things that were said previously, our today's youth needs the soft skills we need would be like empathy, the ability to communicate openly, think outside the box, compassion, all of those things. Like, I guess my question would be, all the things against that were kind of instilled in us as like young kids, and like, not that it's anyone's fault, it's just kind of how socialization works. But how would someone like me, I'm 21 years old, how would I go about teaching myself to unlearn those things that were taught in me and to like take the path that you guys are saying, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a lifetime commitment, Miracle.
But I think, Miracle, the thing to respond to that as well, and I totally agree with you, is that I think unlearning things is something that we all need to do, and that's one of the challenges. Um, you know, the we you know when I spoke the other day at the presentation here, I said one of the things I'd always teach myself, or try to teach myself, is that when I walk into a classroom, I never assume I'm the smartest person in the room, despite the number of degrees I carry, because there are people in that room that have had experiences that I could have never imagined. And I think that's a really humbling moment. And I think maybe this other soft skill that is a soft skill that we need to practice as educators, which is humility, that we always assume that there is so much to learn. There is so much to still learn. And I think, we get caught, and, as both Brett and Tim have touched on, about dealing with people that are like, placing people really quickly into categories, like this, the straw men thing, and we need to unlearn to do that. And that's something that we need to get better at as well. And I always say that, I always challenge my colleagues at the university when they talk about what they expect from students. I always say, well, we need to be what we want our students to be. If we want empathy, we need to show empathy. If we want creativity, we need to show creativity. If we want them to be critical thinkers and listen to multiple views, then how do we do that? How do we portray that? And that's hard for many academics, for many educators, because we also get set in our ways. So I think unlearning is a skill that we all need to get better at, and stop being caught up on, and picking up on Tim's point about Facebook not caring. One of the great ironies is that the people in Silicon Valley with Facebook and social media, is that they saw themselves, a lot of the workers there, and I've read a whole bunch of stuff on this, saw themselves as they go into these jobs as being part of a great democratization, a great solving of challenges, a great connecting of humans, so people are less lonely. The double-edged sword, going back to that concept, is that they've actually perpetuated some of these problems, right? They've perpetuated fake news, they've perpetuated it. And apparently the biggest growing industry in Silicon Valley in 2018, 2019 was mental health professionals who are dealing with people that have become increasingly disillusioned with what they saw their life's work being, creating a more democratized and connected society, and the exact opposite has happened. And I think we all need to kind of recognize that the complexities of things, like, I think the complexity of social media just reflect the complexities of everything else we face in the world. So yeah, so it's something that unlearning and being reflective is something that we all need to get better at, I think.
Yeah, something that Kelly just put in the chat, and it kind of relates to what you're talking about, James and Tim, and all of you really. I'll just read Kelly's words here, but she was talking about that reading stories and books written by authors from different countries has opened her eyes to others' experiences and what's important. And I really resonate with that too. I think sort of, I'm a bookworm, and so being analog, as you might say, and getting out of that digital realm and back to my roots, which are, I was one of those encyclopedia kids. That's the best thing my parents ever bought me, and it was expensive, but I poured through it, and it's made a difference in my life. And I think that I wish we could. It's hard, but I wish we could go back to, or at least encourage all of us, but young people too, to read and go back to those stories. Kelly, do you want to add anything to that? I just love your comment.
Well, in addition to that experience, I think traveling around the world has obviously added to that experience. But I think that for younger people, that might not be possible with their schooling, with their financial situation, or even where we are with COVID now. So now it's like I'm experiencing I remember in high school, I read about the Khmer Rouge, and I I just about lost it. I had no idea that that was happening in the world. I read a book called First They Killed My Father, which was told from the viewpoint of a survivor who was 5 years old when she lived through the experience. And it was like looking at, oh my gosh, there are children and this is what it was just so eye-opening for me. And I've never stopped. And I think that it allows me to just really see what's in the heart of other people and to see that the goodness in everybody, even if they have a different opinion, even if they have a different viewpoint, they're from a place of goodness in their own heart. And if we can see inside everybody's hearts and see that goodness and recognize where they're coming from, I think that we would all have better conversations with each other.
Yeah, I think all of us from all over the world want some very basic things that are similar too. Any other thoughts? We're all over the place now, but I love it. Other thoughts on this topic? I have other questions I want to dive into, but other thoughts on that? Okay. So we've been, we're streaming live on Facebook, but here we go. We've danced around this topic of social media, but this was a question that our students responded to the other day, and I want to hear your thoughts. What are the pros and cons of social media? I kind of know where this is going, but I bet I'll be surprised. So what are some thoughts on this? We'll start with you, Reagan, please. What do you think?
I think it's wonderful. I also think it's awful. I think we would probably all say the same thing. It allows us to express creativity, but then gets us too close to a world of what's not real. When I think about Instagram or Snapchat filters, I think, well, that's really cool. It makes something look more beautiful than it is. It's art in a way. It's certainly photographic. Photography art, that's interesting to me. However, it allows us to represent ourselves falsely to the world. Today's youth are dealing with things we didn't have to deal with as kids. As kids in our generation, maybe there were a few mean girls in the cafeteria who said our outfit was yucky. Today, you post something on your Instagram, and 200 people can throw shade at you for something. Today, any youth is not capable of dealing with that. Adults aren't capable of dealing with that. So I think it is an opportunity that we can capitalize on to get to know different people, different religions, different cultures, different parts of the world. But there needs to be, I think, more responsibility with how we interact with each other on it.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think the question is who's going to take responsibility, who's going to hold people accountable, and you're right, Dr. Romali. Haruko, do you have a thought on the pros and cons of social media?
Yeah, I think there are definitely, obviously, like what Dr. Romali touched on with cyberbullying, there's definitely a lot of, downsides. One of the positive aspects of social media that I've seen recently, especially during this current administration, is the diversification of narratives, right? It really fosters people from marginalized groups to be able to find connections, and I feel like to find like-minded people and to organize and to mobilize behind their interests. And I think seeing all the creative ways that has been done online has given me a sense of hope. But at the same time, I feel like, I feel very torn about the decrease in critical thinking that occurs when we just have a social media peddling out all these secondary information, and that's what people use as primary sources of news now. So that kind of combines with the increased polarization and isolation that everyone's been touching on. Another thing that Miracle's question kind of got me thinking about is, how can we, especially how can young people start to kind of unlearn and decolonize their mind after social media and the commodification that Pamela was talking about. And, my first instinct, especially in my line of work, is to go out and have actual conversations with people. Of course, reading books and educating yourself is very important, but I feel like what happens when you have an actual conversation, face-to-face conversation with someone, is not only you see the humility in someone who may not have the same views as you on paper, but you also realize that humans come in multitudes. We're multidimensional. That Uncle Kevin that James had referred Like maybe we could see Uncle Kevin taking the role of a father. Maybe he's a very loving father to his kids, or maybe he's a very devoted husband to his wife. And these types of multitudes that we experience will really help shape I think young people into having more of an empathy mindset as opposed to the scarcity mindset that unfortunately the previous generation has really instilled in them, telling them that, everything that they do comes with some type of social consequence, or, they can be their bodies and their image can be commodified in these ways, or, the financial scarcities that we were talking about, the fact that, you need tens of thousands of dollars to be able to go to 1 year of college, or, entering a scarce job market. We've really instilled in them the scarcity mindset. And I think really to be able to take a step back from that and start building the empathy mindset is really, it comes down to having conversations with people.
Yeah, I agree. I want to jump around in the order of this because Kelly, I know you have to go, but can you enlighten us one more time with your thoughts on social media?
So if you saw my talk yesterday, the first 10 slides were about misinformation and how we do confirmation bias, and we tend to seek out information that just sort of reconfirms our own prejudices and our own belief systems. And I guess you could just go down that rabbit hole and just go darker and darker and deeper into the negatives. But I can almost turn it on its head and say, well, that's also the same mode that I can use for putting out good information. So I take it as my job, maybe it's not, but I take it as my job to go out and refute cancer myths when I see people post them. So I see somebody post something and they post it usually in goodwill and good faith, thinking like, I've heard that GMOs cause cancer. I'm worried for my friends and family. Let me share this with you. And then I can go in a kind way and say, I understand where your point of view is for this, but this is actual information that is more recent. And have you looked at this? This is actually something that can maybe allay some of your fears. So I love having that vehicle as an opportunity to open the dialogue and conversation. And maybe being online sometimes removes some of the emotion out of the conversation. So it can become very quickly unpleasant in a face-to-face. Sometimes, I'm not saying always, but I've had the anti-vaccine autism conversation probably 30 times in the last year. And usually people can be more measured and calm in their responses riding through social media than what would happen if you were in a face-to-face. So I think that there are some benefits to it. I also, as Haruka was saying, the idea of the movements that young people are coming together, forming, they're protesting for things that they see are certain social injustices. I think that is so fantastic, and maybe something that would not have happened in my generation, because I guess we'd have to call each other on the phone, and maybe you knew 20 people, and now you can get 20,000 people showing. And I think that that's a fabulous tool. So I think social media's negative effects could really be negated if we just worked on teaching people critical thinking skills so that they could navigate the information in the best way possible.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
No, it's great. And you're right. I mean, there's a positive side of the mobilization that social media can really harness. You're right. Tim, I want to go to Tim and then Pamela and then James. Tim, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think ultimately social media is going to be a good thing. Two things make me think that. One is the printing press came out and was extremely disruptive. It caused wars, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions killed. And all the way up till even now today, the Catholics and the Protestants are fighting still in Ireland, although it's more of a straw fight now. But technologies are extremely disruptive, and we have to learn how to use them. And so pamphleteering created the potential for the stealing of the United States from the local, by the locals from Britain. I mean, it depends on the point of view. And so if you fast forward up to now and you look at my generation and the generation before me, we have this belief that if it was written down, then it was true. Like if you read it in the paper, it was probably true because there was somebody monitoring that. And breaking out of that cycle is an interesting process, because I still see it in my parents that, well, I just saw it on the internet, Tim. And it doesn't matter how many times I have the internet conversation with them. I'm at the point now, it's just like, don't buy anything, but the main thing is that you got to break out of that cycle, that if it's written, it's true. And once you break out of that cycle, stuff's just floating off, it just rolls off your back and you skip it. And so I think that we just have to grow as a society into understanding the tool of social media. And eventually, I suppose we will.
Thank you. Pamela, what are your thoughts here? I know you have some thoughts on social media. Oh, you're muted, Pamela.
There we go. Sorry, technology, right? Irving Goffman wrote The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, and what he talked about was the masks that we wear to do what he calls impression management. And those are all roles that have been constructed for us before we arrived on the planet. And usually there are sanctions against us if we don't wear those masks. But impression management is something we all do. And even in Zoom, we all choose our backgrounds carefully. We put our names on our identity bar very carefully. And this has been going on for a long time. And I think about how technology and social media has changed. I remember when the LA Weekly used to be considered such a salacious paper. If you went to the want ads there, you got to be careful, they said, of all the predators that are going to get you if you go to I Seek One Person, right? And there were these dangers of abduction and all these kinds of things. You were going to get in a bad relationship, someone was going to kidnap you. And so, there's always been a sense that technology is bad. There was even proliferation of the idea that the telephone was bad because you could have sex talk from two different people on two different lines of the can and the wire, and it would promote this bad behavior between people. The automobile was considered a sinful weapon for promoting all kinds of activities that people shouldn't be doing. And there were people that actually promoted that this piece of technology would get us into trouble. And so in some ways, these new iterations of Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram are really just another level of communication that I think, again, as everyone have said, can be used for good or for evil. I think the silver lining of this as a sociologist is that now when police kill somebody that's unarmed, everybody's going to know about it. It has been able to create a global social movement around Black Lives Matter, around environmental justice, around workers' rights, around women's rights, around LGBTQ rights. And without social media, we might not have been able to pull off quite the showing we have even this year globally, responding to some of the nefarious activities of some names I won't even mention, that you all are very familiar with. And so I think to go back to what some other people were saying, Haruka in particular, it brings people together. And it's, I think that the youth have, very cleverly been able to manipulate social media for good, like subverting a gathering for 42 and putting in several 100,000 RSVPs that were fake and then not showing up. I thought that was a brilliant tactic of subversive and critical thinking social justice movement on the part of youth. So that's the silver lining and the good aspect of social media that I see right now.
Yeah. James, what are your thoughts on this topic? And then I have a few other questions I want to dive into, but James.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, the mute button's obviously one step too much for me. Look, it's all been said, really. I just think as educators, we do need to think about, I suppose that this new dimension of literacy. So, no longer is it reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's reading, writing, and arithmetic, and living in an online environment. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think it has to be part of a new literacy that we teach, that we encourage. It's not, it's here to stay. And we need to have the skills, both ourselves and also the way that we talk about these things as educators. I mean, one of the things that one of the most stark graphs I've seen was produced by the Pew Research Institute, I think last year, which showed a chart, blue if you vote Democrats, red if you vote Republicans, and what they read, and the chart looked like this, right? So people are just consuming media from different perspectives, and that is because they click on their Facebook pages, they click, those algorithms learn how to manipulate our feeds, and so people are increasingly gone from sharing what we read to sitting further and further apart. And I don't think we should ever underestimate the impact of this. I mean, Benedict Anderson, a very, very famous sociologist and political theorist, talked about the one thing that keeps nations together are a shared narrative. And if we no longer have a shared narrative, if the person in California is not reading or the same, not even touching on the same news sources as a person in Wyoming, then they cease to be, according to Anderson, they cease to belong to the same nation. They begin to belong to different nations. And so I think that the issue with social media, its power is overwhelming, but that power is, again, that double-edged sword concept. And I think, we do need to build it into what we teach as educators, because it's just, criticizing it and seeing its evils is not going to make it go away. Trying to trying to promote the skills that we need to learn as well, to manage it, I think is how we need to react.
Yeah, that splintering of community that you're talking about is, I think, one of the gravest threats that we have, really. But I want to go in another direction, more optimistically, and we'll go back to you, Dr. Romali. When you look to the future, what are you most optimistic about?
I think the creativity of today's youth, and what that could potentially mean for them economically and socially. For example, in our day, to have a job, you had to physically show up somewhere at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you had to physically stay there until 5 o'clock. Someone else is in charge of how much money you make. Someone else determines what classification of employee you are and what your worth to the company is. And someone else determines how much you will make and if you stay with that company. Whereas today's youth are so incredibly creative. They say, you know what, I don't want to make money just 9 to 5. I want to make money 24 hours a day. I want to make money when I'm sleeping. I want to make money in 6 different avenues of revenue generation. So they are using that creativity to work for themselves and not let anyone else determine the amount of money they can make from their families. They're creating YouTube channels, TikTok channels, affiliate marketing, drop shipping, Amazon. They're doing things on the internet, creating blogs, creating their own business. They are, whereas our generation saw a finite amount, future in front of us for how much money we could make or the type of lifestyle we could have, their vision is there are no limits on how much money they can make or what kind of lifestyle they can create for their family. So I think that gives me tremendous hope and really inspiration for what they can provide for their families and their lives. So kudos to them.
Yeah, well said. Haruka, what are your thoughts on this? What are you optimistic about?
Definitely, as someone working in the creative fields, you naturally have to start to learn how to diversify your income, and you have to find ways to, get that day job while you're working on your passion project, right? So that's something that I can identify very closely with, and seeing the peers around me, and seeing photographers who are working editorial jobs, getting assignments, and working for these newspapers, which I'm sure you may all be aware is not a very well-paying job by any means. Going out and and branching out into different careers while maybe maintaining a family, or whether maybe you're a single mother and you're having to invest time in childcare as well, and just seeing all the creative ways that my peers, as well as young people, I'm sure, are going to be kind of navigating this multi-potentialite career paths, I think is very exciting. And also kind of, I wanted to touch on what James was saying about this shared narrative as, American youth. And I feel like even within, as an immigrant in this country, like my narrative of who I am in this country has been very elastic. And I feel like that kind of connects to my hope for being in this country and for the youth of this generation as well, because, these different labels that we've put on ourselves, like in my instance, being a Japanese immigrant, that has kind of, spending a lot of time here, that label has kind of evolved more into more of a political identity as being an Asian American, right? Being an active participant in this country. And even though, yes, Asian American is a very problematic term, you're trying to combine 49 countries into a broad paint stroke, but at the same time, this term was something that immigrants from Asian countries had used to rally behind, to gain citizenship, and to mobilize and to advocate for political rights for their own family members and their peers and their friends. So what I find exciting also for the future generation, but also being in this country, is the kind of elasticity of how we identify ourselves in this country. And I feel like the generation of today, seeing the creativity that they've demonstrated, seeing the articulations that they demonstrated on social media, I feel like we're going to reach a new era where people are going to be identifying in different ways and advocating for different groups, and creating a kind of new kind of American identity. I hope that's not too broad, but that's kind of something that listening to James has brought up.
No, I think it really, it really resonates with me. Tim, you strike me as a perpetual optimist. What are your thoughts on the future?
So I am very optimistic about the future. I think, for one thing, is I have this sense that there's going to be a transformation in how children are raised. From the nuclear family is the focal point, which was an industrial revolution invention so that the nuclear family could move around where jobs were needed, kind of the break off from the extended family. And I think we're going to go back to more of that village, extended family, nuclear family combination. And I'm not sure what the link is here, because I haven't really thought this out, but my sense is that the sort of the global affairs programs, the ISP programs, like the one that Dr. J has put together at College of the Canyons, is one of the major mechanisms throughout the United States for people from our local neighborhoods to meet people from around the world. Because we can talk about social media and how disenfranchising it is, or we can talk about the inability to have understand other people's feelings. We can talk about all that, but nothing is better than taking somebody, picking them up, placing them in the middle of another school in another world, like Dr. Romali talked about with her two boys, and sticking them there, and then they're extremely vulnerable, and then having relationships be built around that vulnerability, relationships which create nurturing and success and moving forward. And that actual ISP kind of activity at campuses across the United States is the number one way to kind of address almost everything that we've talked about in today's scholar panel. And so, are we okay on time here? So yeah, so really it's the work that Dr. J has done. It's the personal sacrifice that Dr. Romali has done in her personal life. It's the effort that James has put into reaching all the way across the other side of the planet to be with us. It's the crazy, completely unwarranted belief that it's a legitimate thing for somebody to do that Haruka did to go out with the audacity to say that she could suddenly be this World War II new Hiroshima conversation. It's those kind of things that bring us back to where we need to be, and it all comes around the academic world. So Pamela is teaching people to think differently, and Kelly is teaching people to start to value the concept of critical thinking, which I still can't even define what it is. And so it's all of that that happens in academia that I think is what is the benefit. And I have nothing but high hopes for whatever academia turns into, whether it's an online world or whether private schools go away. Or I'm working on my my doctoral degree, so I'm constantly being inundated with the future predicting of what's going to happen with higher education. Whatever it turns into, it's still that mechanism for addressing all of the things that we've talked about today. So
Yeah, I
thank
agree.
you for letting me, for indulging
I love
me in
it.
this rant.
I love it, and I agree with so much of that. I think higher education is a mess in some ways. I think academics can be contentious and politicized, but it's also the laboratory for a lot of those things you're talking about, and I think that's so powerful. Same question, Pamela, and then James. What do you? I want to start to wind it down and turn this over to our participants and get some questions from the group here. But Pamela, what are you optimistic about?
Well, I mean, three things. I mean, not to be reiterating what everybody has said, but creativity, innovation, and change. And that takes a great deal of hope. And I'm looking at Ernesto's question in the chat there on the topic of what is considered the common narrative and who gets to define that and who does it pose a threat to. One of my hopes is that our youth will change the definition of that. And they already have started, because they've already challenged definitions and parameters and how that's going to be looking in the future. I am hopeful that for the things that are going to be innovated that we don't even know about yet, and that makes me very excited. I mean, I don't think any of us would be in education if we weren't about positive social change. I mean, otherwise it's just an exercise in futility as far as I'm concerned. But I think that we have very brave young people that are willing to even question what the status quo should be. And so I'm very excited that things actually will change, because they cannot stay the same as they will. Most empires, as ours, eventually implode because of their greed and their overconsumption and their infrastructure not being enough to sustain what they purport they're all about. So things will not remain the same, which is very exciting, but that may include a huge disruption that the dinosaurs and the Karens and anybody that wants to stand in the way is going to be eliminated from. So I'm very excited about that. And I will cheer our youth on as they parade forward with something that we don't know what will happen yet, but if we are, the older we get, and if people say we're not able to adapt, then I'm sorry, you're gonna die off if you can't adapt and ride along with what the wave is going to be coming that's gonna look like. So I'm very excited about that. And I hope I'm around for when the revolution happens.
Hey, I think Bob Dylan says it right. Get out of the way if you can't lend a hand, right?
That's right. Yeah.
James, what do you think here? What are you optimistic about?
Yeah, look, I'm optimistic for a bunch of reasons, but I got really optimistic when I did my Fulbright in the US for 12 months, and I specifically went and lived in a deep red state, because that was, I wanted to understand political partisanship. One of the reports I came across, which was confirmed by my own research, was a report by an organisation called More in Common. And it's also captured in the work by an organisation called Better Angels. And that is the better angels of all of us. And one of the things that the More in Common report, and I encourage you all to read, it's called Hidden Tribes, talks about is how really it's only like 6% of, I think, Democrats and 8% of Republicans don't want compromise. By far the majority of people want to talk across the aisle, want to come together, want to find a solution. And I think that we do want to solve these problems, all of us. We're all connected. We're all connected, and we all want to solve these problems. And I think people are looking for a way forward. So I'm actually optimistic about the fact that even those who we think, who we may disagree with, want to find a way forward. And that, I think, is something to really hold on to, and to employ the tools that Pamela and Haruka have been talking about, to employ those tools to reach out and to work with people to find that common ground and to work together. So yeah, that's my main cause of optimism.
So many other questions we could dive into, but in the interest of time, I want to turn it over to our audience. And are there questions from the group here for anyone that you might have? We've covered a lot here.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Okay, well, if any questions pop up, that's great. I think at this point, I think we, oh, thanks, James, for that link. That's great. I think what we usually do to wind down this whole conference, this forum, is to debrief on the whole week. And so you're welcome to stick around and share your thoughts on that. But I want to turn it over to Dr. J. I think she might have some remarks on her thoughts on all this and where we go from here.
Thanks, Brian. This has been nothing but wonderful the whole week. We thank you for all the wonderful speakers, and thank you for the time and effort and just the good intention that you put into it. We did the dry run, and then people like you, James, that you make sure that you woke up and they did the dry run, and Haruka and everyone. So I just want to say that I believe community college, like as College of the Canyons, we really bear the heavy responsibility of fostering a greater hope and a greater future for all our students. And usually, as Sab has made comments, I think at the day one, usually people, when they think about scholarly exchange, they think about international programs, and people don't tend to think about much when it comes to community college. And we wanted to change that. And I think we did. We did it from last year's just huge success with scholars flying from Egypt, from Taiwan, and all those places, and then from North California to come to our campus to talk to our students, to provide insight, and then to have that fostering that sense of a community. It's a scholarly community among our students with our faculty, and then just a great partnership that we were able to build from there. To pandemic, they hit, we didn't give up. And I think I attribute that to the cohort of the core team that we worked together with Brent and Sab and Maritza and Tim. We didn't want to give up because we realized this actually is the time when a college that prides itself on innovation, on creativity, and also on academic leadership. This is when we can truly thrive. And I believe this week's talks and lectures and panel had attested to that. And I know Dr. Van Hook is not here, but I just want to be on record and say that without her visionary leadership and then her constant stress on the strategic planning, of always planning for the worst and work the best to hope, to have the most viable outcome. I think that's the culture College of Kenyon truly upholds. And then for people like Brent and Sab as a faculty co-leader, and then when Pamela just say yes, never hesitate, and then Kelly just never hesitate and say yes. I think this is what makes the institution unique, and then this is what makes community college unique in its nature. We provide access, engagement, opportunity to the students of diverse background, and I hope that, and not just I hope, I believe with Dr. Jill Biden to be in the White House, her being a community college professor, plus her dissertation is about meeting students' needs at community colleges, about how to engage them. And then her true belief when it comes to globalization of community college, that in the coming few years, that community college and international education will start being brought back to the surface of the discussion, and also with a lot more people paying attention to the true core mission of community college, which is access to success for all students. And then I think this week's sections have proved to the world that for the 14,000 that we have, people that we have reached with our social media boosting and promoting to the world, that community college, it is what President Obama has said, the best kept secret in the United States. And then I'm glad Dr. Regan-Romani was able to bring this best kept secret to the other part of the world. And I believe through social media that we actually are able to bring all this availability of information, knowledge, and goodwill, and most importantly, just a genuine interest in student success to the world. So I just want to thank you all to be here with us. And then what we really are interested in at the end of any activities like this is we want to open up. Tell us what you think. Many of you have attended quite a few sections, and some of you maybe have even just one section, two sections. You are here. We want to hear from you. You have heard enough from the organizers and the speakers. This is the time the audience can really help us. What do you think? What do you want for next year, regardless of in person or online? And the speakers, you guys are with us. This is the first time. If you're to come back with us, what do you want to see change? How do we improve it?
Can I just say one thing there? Yeah, from a observer from across the world, I just really impressed with the range of speakers. I thought it was fantastic, and yeah, I really enjoyed hearing from everyone. Like I felt like I learned a lot. And unfortunately, the time zone meant that I couldn't attend many of the sessions, but I would have loved to have attended more, and I would have loved to have been there in person. I think going forward, the issue of a hybrid event would be fantastic, and it would really great to sort of do some more internationalization, more international connections. I think would be really exciting, and this format allows us, I think, allows that to happen. I really enjoyed the student panel. I just thought that was really insightful, and I thought that worked really well. One of the things I suppose that would be interesting to think about, and again, I don't know, is actually even preparing some of the students to chair some of the sessions, you know, to sort of give them confidence to do that, not necessarily just that session, but maybe other sessions. And I thought Sab did a fantastic job, and I think for that session, having I suppose a more senior person to chair it, just to help facilitate the discussion, probably works better. But maybe there's also a chance for a little bit less pressure on the organisers to chair every session, to have other maybe students participate and give them more ownership. And I know that's something we've done, and that's worked really well here. So that would be one, only one suggestion. But just, yeah, like I loved it. And it was, I think, I can't remember who introduced me to it. I think it was Michael Wolf who introduced me to sort of this, and I got really excited when he first introduced me, and I was I really do hope to stay connected.
Wonderful, and I think that's a terrific suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and to be in, to be able to have these academic conversations and to be in this scholarly place, like that's not something that I get to experience on a regular basis. So I really, truly am grateful that you invited me to be a part of this conversation. I was just fascinated, like James was saying, by the broad, backgrounds of everyone, right? And to be able to speak on an issue from, like Kelly from a scientific background versus a sociologist background, from Pamela's viewpoint to, I think that is really fascinating and could be bolstered more if we could speak on a singular topic maybe, or something that feels a little more focused maybe, and to be able to approach that from different angles. I feel like that would be very interesting to see maybe for next year.
Thank you so much, Horika.
I would like to say thank you to Jai and the crew at ISP for putting this together again. And I too really, I learned so much from colleagues domestically and abroad from these situations. And I thought this was really a terrific opportunity. I think just to kind of elaborate on what others have said, it would be, I know we would have more time now if we started planning next year and then expanding other continents into the conversation. And because we have scholars all over the world. And again, one of the silver linings of technology is that we're able to do this and pull it off without having to have logistics like airplanes and hotels and who's going to feed our guests and those sorts of things besides Nai, right? I think I could envision us having scholars from Latin America, from Canada, from other European nations, and I think we have the right structure set up already. I also like the idea of having student panels where students are discussing some of the issues that maybe they conjure up as important, and designing something like a poster session on a theme or even a discussion on some issues that they feel will be relevant. And it'll be interesting to see where we are a year from now, because I'm sure so much will change as things are rapidly moving at a freight train speed. So, but thank you again, Jai.
Love it.
Yes, thank you, Jai. I really had a great time, and I'm so honored to be among such intelligent people. I think Haruka had a really cool idea to take a topic like social media or a topic and then have different perspectives, a sociologist perspective, a psychologist perspective, a artist perspective, a scientific perspective. That's a cool idea. I think that's really neat.
Thank you. I think John just unmute himself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So I just wanted to quickly echo what Pamela said earlier. And I think that this was really well put together, and obviously not something we were envisioning when we started planning this, but it's amazing when we put together. And I definitely think the idea of really leveraging the technology that we have, I think is something that's really worth keeping in mind. So hopefully a year from now, we will be fortunate enough that we can do this in person, because I do think there is a lot of benefit to kind of the in-person aspect. I definitely missed it a little bit, but I feel like we can still incorporate a lot of kind of these remote these remote mediums. I think it's a way that we can perhaps have other speakers who might not be able to come to the US as easily. And I do think we really put it together really well. I think the team, Maritza, you, everyone, I think we really made it work absolutely fabulously. So I think a kind of combination in person and remote would be a really great way to kind of do it next time. I think we should kind of keep this, but still the in-person thing is still cool though, of course, but we can do a little of both.
It's a fool when it comes in person.
I didn't want to say it, but yes.
We got so much food last year. Anyone else? I think, Timmy, just unmute yourself.
I hope that we can just recreate the same structure that we've done this year. I think we need to, we're constantly expanding our offerings through ISP, and one of the COC Global components, flagship events, is this event. And I think we found a formula that works well. And so I hope we recreate it. I know that the in-person is a great idea, but I think that probably should be a spin-off, and we need to find another way to do that. If we start now recruiting speakers. And if we polish our marketing, then I think those are the only two things I think we need to do besides repeat the same process.
It's interesting to kind of combine last year's recommendation with this year's recommendation. Last year we're in person and we packed the room quite a few times. And last year, one of the students, I believe, well, actually a couple of students, really what they wanted is for the scholars to visit their classes. After they attended the scholarly lectures by different speakers, some students say, I wish this person would come to my class. So we wanted to incorporate for this year, before we knew there would be the pandemic, to have this, that we were going to send out, these are the speakers, these are their bios, please let us know which speakers that you would like to come and attend your class to talk to your students. And I think next year, if we're able to do in person for the scholars who can come on campus, I think it will be a wonderful opportunity to offer our scholar out, right, to the professors who want to, like this Pamela, for example, might want to go speak with Kelly's class, and then Brent may want to talk to Pamela's class, but bring it together as a theme, right? Whatever the theme, we do have a theme, the theme next semester. So we went from identity to migration. So next year's theme is transition. So still under the theme of transition. And then we can talk about if we want to have a focused topic, or we go through the themes with similar approach, but then from there on, the next 3 years, we can look at the topics more specifically, but from a multidisciplinary approach. And that is something that I think the core group, we should take into consideration. And then that's from the first year is what they want is we want the scholars come to our class to visit my classes. I want my classmates and my students to hear about all these. So that is something that I think is like what Tim says, a combination of in-person and also the in-person and also virtual. Now, I like the idea of, because now we're in Zoom, inviting people from different parts of the world. And I will even want to do it in different languages. Because what I think it is important is, we, again, are very American-centric, right? So everybody come, you all have to speak English and all that. Why not have speakers from Latin America? We just have translation, right? We bring the world to a real world. We put the real world to the academia. Right, the real world, and not everybody speak English. We shouldn't be so American-centric in that sense. If we're a speaker from Latin America, we should let the speaker speak in Spanish, or whatever Chinese language, or whatever language that people want to speak, that's their native language. Then we'll find a speaker, we'll find a translator for it. I think in terms of the COC global overarching purpose, right, it's great. Now everybody's, it's English, and then we're all comfortable with it. But perhaps we also should use the language as a way of bringing out the uncomfortableness of this American-centric living that we love so much. And then the COC Global will be the one that wants to do a multilingual presentation of the most brilliant ideas on earth. And then the Americans learn how to listen to that translation and they integrate into our mindset and the beliefs. That is something that I also think that the core group, perhaps we should consider as well for next year's speakers.
And that dials in back into what we were talking about of learning how to stand in someone else's shoes and learning to take different perspectives. So I really like that idea, Jai, and I think it's lovely.
Thank you. And I also love the idea of letting students be the channel, be the moderator, right? Yes, yes, James.
Jay, I will say that the idea of inviting scholars into classrooms is fantastic. One of the really great things that the Fulbright program does in America is smaller colleges qualify for what they call a Fulbright enrichment program, where they fund Fulbrighters to fly in and spend some time at that college. And I was invited to give a keynote to Washington and Jefferson College in Pennsylvania. And but the best part of it, I enjoyed the presentation and whatever, but the best part of it was I probably got to go to half a dozen classes to run sort of different parts of it, and one of the classes I got to go to, which was so cool, was that there was a linguistics class. And I know nothing about linguistics, but they just wanted to hear me speak. I just wanted to hear my accent, and that was really cool. But what that forced me to do, when I turned up, is to sort of do some, just a little bit of desk research about Australian accents and why, in America you can hear how someone from Texas sounds different from someone from California, whereas in Australia we don't have that. And sort of, you don't know if someone's from Sydney or Melbourne or Perth or Adelaide or whatever. And so it really forced me as a scholar to want to know a little bit of background. So at least I was armed. And then I turned up and we got to speak about this stuff. And it was just such an awesome experience, right? It was so awesome. And so I think that is not only enriching for the students, but for scholars and educators, that time to spend to sort of just say, so it's not just about sort of saying, hey, this is James's expertise as a sociologist or whatever, but this is a little bit about him, and he's willing to speak to anyone who wants to listen, who's willing to hang. I'll speak to anyone who wants to hang out with me. And I just think I think that's potentially a really powerful thing.
That's actually how we found you, James. It's through the Fulbright Enhancement Program, because last year, that's how we were able to find this scholar from Japan who was at Berkeley at that time. And he ends up the Fulbright Scholar Enhancement Program. They love community colleges because very few community colleges actually ask them to share that program, Fulbright, who already on other campuses and with their research and all this. They were really responsive and enthusiastic. So we found you, but then you were home when the pandemic hit. So, but you're absolutely right. In that sense, we have so many international scholars already in the United States. And next year, if we could meet in person, I assume we could, we want to have a hybrid of it. It's like the world is never going to go back to where it was, right? And then people are so used to and love the Zoom world. With the Mac update, people complain about it doesn't work with Mac, it doesn't work with Zoom. People chose to downgrade Mac software, which is because they could not live without Zoom. So you just kind of think about in a matter of 6 months that the evolution of Zoom meetings that have brought together the opportunity to the point that the devoted Mac users like me actually would choose Zoom over a Mac software update. And that's just a change of mindset, just a little bit in terms of how technology is in many ways shaping our life a little bit differently, but in so many ways also help us stay consistent in our forever desire to pursue truth, right? And the truth is defined in in every different moments on different topics, but it's that genuine interest to have that dialogue. So people can feel, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't think, like, I love Paxton's questions to Dr. Romani. Why did you decide to do this on your own, to adopt 2 kids from China? Oh, on your own with the environment and culture that you're familiar with. We give that sense of what our truth in our feelings, truth in our intellectual pursuit, and truth of what the future would hold for our generation of students. This forum is more for our students than anything else, right? We wanted to do this, and Brent and Sab and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. We do this for our students. We do this for the generation of the students to come, because in 10 years, they are going to be the policy makers. They will be the decision makers to decide what kind of world all of us here are going to grow old into. Who is going to be our road? Who is going to decide what kind of platform that we're going to use? What kind of healthcare system we're going to have? So if we, this generation, who are in the position of being able to provide intellectual platform and dialogues like this to our students, if we don't do a good job with that, the way the days are coming in, and like what is when we grow old into, it's not going to look pretty bright. So I think the dialogues today and the optimistic nature about the creativity of today's youth brings me a lot of hope. And then with that, our core group will get together and continue to innovate, continue to think about better ideas to bring together the scholars as much as possible, either in person or through online platform. Use the technology, use the blessing of technology, but also tap into the beauty of in-person meetings if we can. And I think because I still see the value of all that. So the faculty co-coordinators, you guys work hard.
Well, I'm grateful to be a part of this, and it's one of the highlights of my professional career, and I love working with you and your whole team, and Tim and Maritza and Saab. It's been great, and I'm so appreciative of it. It's actually inspirational. It sort of sort of recharges my own teaching and the way I approach what I do. So thank you. It's been a blessing.
Yeah, I just show up to these Zoom meetings for planning, and then Maritza does all the work. So it's really not that difficult.
This is true.
Right, but no, it is true. I mean, I second everything Brent said, and I mean, unfortunately, normally, I mean, if your speakers were here to speak last year, we would have given you all the round trip tickets to LAX and a place to stay and fancy great food made by Jai's mom and everything, and you missed all that because this is just being virtual. But anyway, we really do appreciate your participation either way, and hopefully, maybe we can someday all meet face to face, and that would be awesome. But anyway, so thank you so much. And by the way, I'm going to have to leave in like a minute because I'm late to my curriculum committee meeting and somebody's proxying, but I need to join them. So, but anyway, thank you. Before I leave, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and it's been great.
Thanks.
Wonderful. So yeah, I have to talk to China in a few minutes. Thank you all, and I think that's a great segue for us to say goodbye. Segue to say goodbye. Does that make sense? Is that oxymoron? Thank you. We hope to see you all soon, because what we want is, wouldn't it be great the third year that we can bring all the 3 years speakers together for something. We don't know yet. We're going to come up with something.
Yeah.
Oh, one more
Thank
thing.
you.
I want to thank James for all the website that he sent on the chat box. We will save the chats, and so we'll be looking at those websites that he shared. Appreciate that.
Yes, we'll come to visit you in Australia, because we were supposed to go to Australia in May with Education USA tour, but couldn't make it.
I just don't give me any Marmite. I'm just saying, no Marmite for me.
You just haven't eaten it properly. You need an Australian to show you how to eat it. You need the we actually call it Vegemite, but you need the right Vegemite butter balance, and the bread needs to be toasted to the right level. So just don't come with an open. Let's unlearn your bad Marmite behavior experiences, and I'll relearn and give it one more go. One more go.
My first encounter with Vegemite was in Natal, South Africa. So maybe they processed it made it wrong. So, Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
all.
everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
We didn't do the pool for the Scholarly panel. I guess we're okay.
We don't need it for us.
Yeah. No, for the Scholarly Journal. Okay. All right. Thank you.